have sparkling cider. So, little birthday toast. So, Tami, we can do that. Indeed. Here we are. To all of you. Are we on? That's pretty cool. Good. All right. So, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for coming. Hi, virtual audience. Thank you for coming. If you haven't noticed, we have put photos of author visits on the screen, but for unknown reasons, some of them are sideways. And it could, I know, and it could really drive you nuts, and I have no idea why. So we're going to try it again. They all came off my phone, but Patrick has untold treasures on his phone. And we found some real photographs, an entire cache of them, which we're going to have to now photograph the photographs so that we can make them digital. But I'm hoping at some point that we can get a huge number of them up there. But I apologize for the sideways ones. They can make you really dizzy. Right. So here we are. Anyway, it's been 5 years since we have seen Tami. Wow, long time.
Yeah.
So we're really glad you're back with Bradley.
I'm glad I'm back too. Yeah, it's good to be back.
And she's not going to be so dilatory in the future. Sometimes life just deals you a lot to deal with, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I had one of those spans of time where everything that could go wrong did go wrong, and it was natural disasters and catastrophes of every description. So.
That's what happens when you live in Southern California, right? Right. So no target there to Southern California. But anyway, I think an interesting question, which we sort of briefly explored at dinner, is that Tami's from Minnesota, and I'm from Chicago, so we're both Midwestern girls. Why are you writing about Louisiana?
I got intrigued by South Louisiana through a weird roundabout way back in the late 80s, early 90s. Being a Minnesota girl, I was listening to a Prairie Home Companion on Minnesota Public Radio.
Of course you were. Garrison Keillor was king.
That's that especially at that time, that was like, everyone religiously listened to Garrison Keillor. And he had on his show as a musical guest the Cajun group Beausoleil with Michael Doucet, the fiddle player. And I was listening to this music, and I'm like, this is amazing music. And it's all sung in French, which I do not speak. I still do not speak French. But I just kept feeling like I should know the words to these songs. I felt like I should be able to join in on the chorus. And I'm like, well, that's strange, and I want to get to the bottom of that, because being a writer, we have to research literally everything. Anything catches our interest, and especially now. But back then, you had to do it the old-fashioned way.
Actually go there.
You had to go there. You had to go to the library. You had to, it wasn't like now where everything's at our fingertips. But so I started researching the music and the origins of the music, and that led me into research about the culture and how that place came to be. And eventually I went down there and experienced it for myself. And I just really fell in love with it, and especially as a setting for suspense, because it is naturally atmospheric, You've got the heat, the humidity, the moss-draped trees, the bayous, the swamps, and the people are so alive. There's the culture is very, very alive. There, it's the music, it's the food, it's people with their hearts on their sleeves all the time, and I just fell in love with it.
Here you are.
Yeah.
Right.
So here I am. Yeah.
And you're going on with it after Bad Liar, right?
I am. Yeah. So Bad Liar is the third book in my. I kind of call it my accidental series, because the original book with these main characters came out in 1997. It was that long ago. It was. And when I wrote that it was the third, I think it was the third suspense novel I'd written, and I started my career in romance. And in romance, you don't write a series with continuing main characters, because you have to resolve all their problems in the book, and you are never to put them through anything ever again, or the readership will hunt you down is just not done. You know, in romance you spin off secondary characters, and that's how you write a series in romance. But obviously in suspense, continuing protagonists is the thing. You know, so I finished that book and I thought, you know, I could actually write a series now. And I like these characters. I like to know what happens next with them. But then I was talking to my editor, who also came from the romance world, and I told her, I'm like, yeah, I think maybe I'll write another book about these characters. And she was like, oh no, do something else. She was like, she didn't like the idea of a series. It wasn't natural to her. She thought it was the wrong time to do a series. And so I stepped away from them because she's the one who tells the accounting department to write me a check. You know, like, I better listen to her. And, you know, so then I wrote something else, which ironically became the catalyst for a series, for a different series. And I, you know, got sidetracked on all these other things. But I kept hearing from readers year after year after year, are you ever going to write about Nick and Annie again? And so finally, you know, lots of things had changed. I'd gone to a different publisher, and I thought, yeah, I'd like to write about Nick and Annie again. And it had been like 25 years, I think, when I wrote The Boy. And it was like just walking back into a group of old friends. And I haven't stopped writing about them now. I've been planning to start work on the fourth novel with them when I get home.
So despite the 25-year gap, this is fiction. Did you actually age the characters 25 years?
No.
Of course not.
No, because we're at liberty to do whatever we want in fiction. So I moved them from a thin dark line. I decided I would take them forward like 5 or 6 years. You know, so things had gone on in their lives, their relationship had developed, and then we jumped off from there.
That makes perfectly good sense.
Yeah.
All right, so here we are with Bad Liar. A very interesting title. Is this your title? Is this one imposed upon you? I don't know if you all know that publishers get to title books, not authors, and they also get to do the cover illustrations. The publisher owns the book, and the writer owns the text, if that makes sense. So very often, whatever you might have decided to call it is not what it
doesn't
ends up
always
being.
stay that way.
That's
yeah.
right.
In this case, this is my title,
Aha.
and and it came out of music. So I ready to come back and write again, and I listened to that. You know, people always ask writers where they get their inspiration from, and what writers they are inspired by, and some of my favorite inspirations are songwriters, because, you know, I get 500 pages to tell a story. They get 3 minutes to say what they have to say and touch your deepest emotions just like that, and evoke feelings in the listener. So I listened to a lot of music, and I was listening to the group Imagine Dragons, and they had a song called Bad Liar. So I'm listening to the song, and the song is about a guy who's in a relationship that he thinks is going south, and it's all going to fall apart. But the thing about music is, when we listen to music, we automatically imprint those lyrics on our own memories, things that happened to us, people we knew, you know, that sort of thing. It becomes very personal, and it might not have anything to do with what the songwriter intended at all. I was recently, I went to see Brandi Carlile at Red Rocks, and she was telling the story of a couple of her songs and what her intention was and who she thought she was reaching with those songs. And they reached a whole different audience grabbed onto these songs. She had written a song about her father, who was an alcoholic, and she meant for it to be kind of cathartic for children of alcoholics, and the people who really latched onto the song were alcoholics. which was a total surprise to her. But that's what happens, with music. So I'm listening to this song, and what it's saying to me is, this is a guy who's basically afraid of being found out, and he reminded me of someone I used to know who had skated through his whole life on good looks and charm and had been very successful at that. But in his heart of hearts, he knew that was a facade. And so every day he got up with this horrible, sick feeling that would be the day that somebody looked at him and went, oh, wait a minute, you're not who you pretend to be. And then that started making me think about a character and led on from there.
Isn't it wonderful how authors think, I mean,
so it's weird.
I know, well, I mean, many people, we've had so many funny conversations over the years about, authors, and, we're drifting along and the author's thinking, I could kill someone right there, or whatever. So it is kind of, it is an interesting mindset. Did you, in visiting there, it's a different language than Minnesota. And even if you don't speak French, you must have had to get your head into the rhythm of, how they're talking, so that your characters would speak in a way that
sounds authentic.
Louisiana.
I for whatever reason, I have a good ear for the dialect, and so it comes very naturally to me to write dialogue with those characters. It's just I hear them, like as if I was listening to people, live, real people have a conversation, but I hear that dialect very naturally.
There's several characters in the book that have lead roles, because it's not just like one person. So I hope I'm not mixing this up with another book, but I think there's a high school. I mean, a guy that had a vision for his life that led someone else to do something terrible to somebody in high school. I do have the right book, right?
Yes, that's the right book.
Great.
Yes,
and
it is.
So that is still playing out in today. And I thought about that. High school is such a tough time, I don't know how many of you remember high school closely, but I can still, even at 84, can still remember high school. And it would be very hard if you had, I think, aspirations to move on, and then something thwarted them.
Yeah, well, I think particularly this is set in a small town, and I'm from a small town, and I know that it's a place where everybody knows everybody knows your relatives, everybody knows what you do the second you do it, and you can become labeled as the best thing you ever did in high school, or the worst thing you ever did at the lowest point in your life. And those labels are you stuck with those labels, as long as you're in that environment. That is how people view you. They don't necessarily want to have that vision changed. This is who you are to them, and they're perfectly happy to accept that. So with in this book, we have two men who went to high school together. Robbie Fontenot, son of a surgeon, a prominent family, had all the advantages, had his future laid out in front of him, and it goes badly sideways, and he becomes addicted to drugs, and his life spirals down, and was the scandal of the town at the time. And even though he hasn't stayed there, he's gone away, he's been in jail, he's been in rehab, he comes back to this town, and that's who he still is to the people who live there. And on the flip side of that, we have Marc Mercier, who grew up the son of a junk dealer, who wanted all those opportunities and had to scratch and claw to get to a place to take advantage of those. With his intention being to get out of that place where he could then become whoever he wanted to be. And yet 10 years later, he's drawn back there by his family, by the illness and death of his father. So, but they're still dealing with those small town labels.
Right, and then you have that person in high school who isn't going to be a huge persona himself, but thinks that if he can tag on to somebody else, and that. I mean, this is a really cruel book. I'm sorry to say.
It is.
In lots of
it
ways.
is in some ways. Yes.
It really is. Yeah. And the it's I thought you did an amazing job of putting yourself into the mind of like a 18-year-old kid, which you're not.
No, not for a long time.
Well, you were never an 18-year-old boy.
No, that's true.
Therefore, kids do stuff, without thinking about the consequences, and then if they have to live with them over a long period of time, which is really what happens here, it's horrendous.
Yeah, that burden stays with them.
Right.
Yeah.
So 3 lives basically are completely thrown apart by one actor.
Yep.
But they can't ever really escape each other.
No.
So what about the women? Because this is actually a book about women gaining, what's the current phrase? Agency? Women gaining agency? Okay. Anyway, this is about women who decide to move into their own power. Yay for them.
Yeah, yay for them. That subplot was a little bit of a surprise to me. I kind of
Initially, see that one going?
Well, initially I thought it was. I didn't think it would become as involved. I didn't think it would become as substantial as it did. But I enjoyed writing that a lot.
Yeah, it's very dramatic.
Yeah.
Ooh, right. And I suppose there's really only one way that could play out successfully.
Yeah, well, and then it's not just that particular subplot, but B'Lynn, the mother of Robbie Fontenot, who initially Robbie and Marc Mercier both go missing, and we don't know if that's independent of one another or if one thing has something to do with the other. We don't have any way of knowing that. But Robbie's mother, who came up in a time where she was a debutante and she married a prominent surgeon and she bought into that whole mindset of being the doctor's wife and everything, and then her life comes completely unhinged because of her son's drug addiction and what that does to their family, and she has to kind of reinvent herself through that whole thing as well.
Yep, very true. We've talked about the characters. What can you actually say about the plot without spoilers? This is a complicated plot. So it's not like there's just one through line. But
so we start out with a dead body. We start out with a body being found dumped at the end of a dead end road in the middle of nowhere. And it is unidentifiable. This is somebody who's been shot in the face with a shotgun. It's not going to be easy to get to the bottom of who this is. There's no ID on the body at all. Face is obviously gone. Hands are pretty well gone, because what happens when somebody points a shotgun at your face? You go like that. So it's going to take a little bit of time to figure out who this is. And then we have, on the same day, the police have, the sheriff's detectives have one piece of evidence off this body, which is a business card from Mercier junk dealers. And they go to see, can we get any information? There's a little note on the business card. Maybe somebody remembers writing on that. Maybe somebody remembers a customer or whatever. And they go to the junkyard, and the first thing that happens is the woman who runs the place says, "Oh my God, is this about my son? He's missing. He's been missing for a couple of days. We can't get a hold of him. Doesn't answer his phone. He was supposed to meet his brother to go hunting on Sunday, and we've not seen or heard from him. Back at the law enforcement center, Detective Annie Broussard has come back to work after an absence. She had been attacked, had a head injury, and she's just coming back from that. She's supposed to not be doing anything that day except counting paper clips, and she's walking through the building, and a woman is begging for someone to help her because her son has gone missing, and that is B'Lynn Fontenot, and her son Robbie is missing. And Annie sits down with her and talks to her, finds out Robbie is, a recovering drug addict. B'Lynn had gone to the town police force, and they were not terribly interested in his case because he's an adult. He can disappear if he wants to disappear. He has this sketchy history. So this is somebody who's, he's probably fallen off the wagon. He's probably somewhere doing drugs, or he's died of an overdose, or he just took off because he couldn't deal with it anymore. So the town police are not too interested in helping her. And so she's come to the sheriff's department to just literally beg for someone to help her. And Annie says, yes, I'll help you. And that's how we kick it off.
Oh, that is how we kick it off. I have to say that bad luck plagues some of the characters in this. There is a crime that, in fact, should have been successfully concealed, but bad luck does them in. So I kind of like that, and I was sad that the bad luck did them in because I actually wanted them to get away.
You really
with
wanted them to get away
with
it.
I did. I absolutely did. I thought, oh, rats. So anyway, there's a lot going on with a lot of different people in the book.
Yeah, it's a juggling act, this one. Yeah.
It really is.
Yeah.
So as a writer, do you have any idea where you're going when you start? Are you one of those people that just starts writing and figures it out as you move?
Yeah, it's pretty much seat of the pants. I knew the premise. I know, this is how it usually goes. I know the premise. I know the crime that kicks everything off. I might have an agenda to begin with. I might have this is the bad guy in mind, and this is the person who's dead in mind. It will change many times as I'm writing the book because it has to unfold organically, and I meet characters that I didn't foresee being in the story, and things take different twists than I anticipated. I don't write from an outline, and that's part of the reason why, is because I like that element of surprise. I want to discover this as I go. And years and years and years ago now, I tried the outline thing because I had gone to a writer's conference, and I went to a seminar on plot, which is always given by people who write outlines. And then they tell you that you must write an outline, and it must be a certain way. And I'm like, oh my God, if somebody finds out that I didn't write an outline, what's going to happen? So they're going to throw me out in the street. And so I went home and tried to write from an outline and was just miserably unhappy. Absolutely hated it. Can't do it, won't do it. So I wrote the outline, and then I'm like, well, now I know everything that happens. This isn't any fun. I'm like, everybody's going to know what happens. It just doesn't work for me that way. So, yeah, it just has to take on a life of its own. Yeah.
Do you think that writing romance before you came to mystery gave you enough confidence to, because romance is basically a plot. There are variations, but basically it's the same plot.
Yeah.
Crime fiction is not. So if you hadn't had practice, do you think you could have made the switch as easily?
I don't know. I mean, the thing for me when I, starting in romance and signing on with Bantam when I did, I started out in what's called category romance, which is like your Silhouettes and Harlequins. The books, the book comes out. The books come out every month, and then they're gone. And I started out writing romantic comedy, and I did that really purposely because I knew I could write comedy, and not everybody can do that. And I thought this will be my in because I can write comedy, and it was. But that line of books gave their writers a lot of latitude to do different things. You were never pigeonholed there. So I could go off in all these different directions and try, different subgenres within, it's all a romance, but maybe this one's going to be a little romantic suspense and that, so I could dabble in that. And so it was, for me, it was just a natural progression. And then when I wanted to write a big standalone book, none of my ideas were funny at all. I was like, okay, well, we're not going to do comedy because I didn't have an idea that could sustain a full-length novel. But every idea I have had a dead body in it. And so I was just like, okay, well, that's what we're doing. So.
Well, you're not alone. I mean, there are a number of authors that switched from romance into crime. Tess Gerritsen, for example, wrote a lot of romance, and then she developed crime fiction. Who else am I thinking of? Yeah, Janet, that's very true. She did Carolyn Todd. Do you remember when she wrote as Charles Todd? She and her son together. She had written romance before. Linda Castillo, that's who I was trying to think of. Linda wrote romance, and then she, became a crime writer and writes the Amish series, which I really love, set in Ohio with Kate Burkholder, the police chief. It's a wonderful series. So it's interesting to me how there are romance writers that just seem to go dark, as they write along.
Well, I always say, I start writing romantic comedy, and now I write about murder, and people are like, oh, that's a gives me whiplash. That's a big leap. And I always say, I've been in enough relationships that I don't think it's much of a leap anymore. It's just like,
when maybe murder was on your mind.
Yeah, like, okay.
It's easier to write it than just kill him. Yeah, I know. I could understand how that might work, right? But anyway, I mean, it takes, I think, a lot of confidence to just start out without an outline and think that you can get to the end of the road. I know lots of writers, that's the only way they want to write. They want to be surprised. It does also often involve a lot of rewriting.
It actually doesn't for me.
Doesn't for you?
It does not. No, weirdly no. And I don't know why that is. I don't know how that happens. Some of that just has to be mysterious to everyone. But like when I wrote A Thin Dark Line, I couldn't decide who the bad guy was. I could not decide, and I was almost to the end of the book, and I'm like, I have to write a climax. I don't know who the bad guy is. And I thought, well, I need to take a step back. I'm too close to it. I'm too into it, and I need to take a step back. And so I sent it to everybody in New York. I sent it to my agent. I sent it to my editor. And I said, I just want everybody to read this where it's at, and you tell me who you think did it.
You should have sent a ballot.
They didn't.
It could be.
They didn't know. They didn't know that I didn't know. I wasn't sharing that information. So I'm like, oh, I'm in trouble now. And I sent it, and my editor called me, and she said, first I thought it was this person, and then I thought it was that person, and I thought, no, I think it's this person. Because that is so sick and twisted that only you would think of it. And it was someone that I had not once considered to be a potential bad guy in this book. And I thought, yeah, but that's a really good idea. And then I thought, oh my God, I'm going to have to rewrite the whole bloody book because I hadn't intended, what could be in there? I would have to go back and lay all these clues and do all these things. And I went back and I read it, and it was actually all in there. I did almost nothing. Yeah. Some part of my devious brain had already put that in there, and I just hadn't seen it. Yeah, so it's just a weird process,
Yeah, but everybody's process is different. I'm always interested at events like this because so many of you ask, about the writer's process, and the thing is, it's not transferable. It doesn't really matter how she writes because you're not going to write that way. I mean, it's interesting, from a technical standpoint, but it's not actually going to be a help if you want to be a writer, because you have to find your own path.
Yeah, you really do.
So, any movie or TV interest?
Yeah, actually, I am very happy to report. Yeah, I've had lots of interest in this book and in the series, and am have spoken to several different producers and kind of settled on one. We're working on a contract now on a writer producer who wants to take it out and shop it around as a probably to a streaming service, because he and I both had the same feeling that there were some that wanted to do episodic television, weekly television, where it was a crime an episode, and it's all solved in an hour, which is not my favorite thing. I prefer to take that story and break it into 6 or 8 pieces and really be able to tell the story and really be able to develop the characters, and that's his intention as well. So fingers crossed. I mean, it's like buying a ticket to the lottery,
Right. But if you live in Southern California, I'm not sure that you can be a writer without a movie deal. I mean,
Yeah.
there has to be some pressure on you to have something going on.
Yeah, well, and back in the day, A Thin Dark Line actually got optioned. It was optioned. It was supposed to be a 2-part movie of the week mini series. What they were doing at the time, and the same production company bought it that had done Night Sins, and they had done a pretty good job with Night Sins. I was not unhappy with that. So I thought, well, okay, this will be great. They'll take it. But when they sent me the script, now that was they went and hired a script writer, a woman who had been writing a series. I don't know if anybody remembers this movie from back then, but The Big Easy. And then it became a TV show briefly. And the woman who was writing that, they hired her to do, because that was an obvious, set in New Orleans, and this is, South Louisiana. But then she just plugged in all her characters that she was currently writing for that other show. The script in no way resembled the book at all. And I was just like, oh, please take my name off from this. I'm like, this is not going to go well. This isn't going to work. And I don't really want to be associated with it. And then what happened was the woman who was the head of, it was at ABC, it had been greenlit to go to production. And the woman who was the head of the movie division got fired. And they brought in a new person. And Hollywood is like the Wild Kingdom. And when the new head of the pack comes in, they kill all the projects from the person that just left, because there's no upside to them producing that. If it's a success because the person that left is the person that bought it. And if it's a failure, it's your failure because you're the person who ended up actually producing it. So they just killed it. And I was ever so grateful.
Yeah, I can imagine you were. But, that happens when there's a change of administration. I mean, publishing's been an absolute Game of Thrones recently. Yeah. And as soon as there's a new person that comes in to head one, it's like, wipe out, And that's true in corporations as well. The new person comes in and they want a clean house, have their own team.
It is, yeah. I was kind of imagining David Attenborough narrating the change of power.
Right. I know.
The old lion is out, and
it is like the Wild Kingdom. No, very, very true. So, how about questions from all of you? You haven't seen Tami for a long time, so Tami, you take over.
All right. Yes. Mm-hmm.
In progression. So obviously age and taking the relationship, that's an easy part. But how did you figure how you were going to do, and now you have that liar, like the technology and everything that changed?
Yeah. I don't write a lot of detailed forensic technology. So while I find that fascinating in real life, it's not what I want to write about. I want to write about the psychology of the characters, the the dynamics of their relationships, and this book does not have a lot of forensic stuff in it. It takes place in a very compact amount of time. So like they've sent stuff to the lab, they don't even get it back, they're not going to get it back in time, for what the span, the days this book takes up. So I didn't really have to deal with a big advance in forensic technology or anything like that. It's more the politics involved in law enforcement, the relationship they have. Like they talk about, they use a local lab. They have a contract with a local lab that, Nick, who's the head of their detective division, is like, I want to get out of that contract. They talk about stuff like that, but they don't, they're not talking about, really detailed science. So, anybody else? They're a quiet crowd.
Just leaving me to do all the heavy lifting now. Come on. Right. Pat, is there, there's somebody.
Oh, thank you. Oh, wow. Oh, my gosh. Mm-hmm. Okay, I write chronologically. I write from the beginning through to the end. I edit as I go, which a lot of people will tell you don't do that because you can get mired in the, and you never finish. But that's what works for me. So like I'll start my day, I reread what I wrote the day before, and I tinker and fuss and tinker and fuss and tinker and fuss, and then at some point I decide I got to go on, and I jump off from that and write new material, and then that's the same thing the next day. So that's how I do it. So I'm not a draft writer. And a lot of people are draft writers, and they will tell you must write a crappy first draft, that you should sit down and start it and just knock out the bare bones of the story and then go back and flesh things out and stuff. And that just doesn't work for me. I don't, I'm very perfectionistic. So for me to write a really rough first draft, I would just be beside myself that it wasn't good enough, and it just doesn't work for me. So that's my process, but everybody's got their, you really do have to find your own and what works for you.
So in a typical day, how much would you write? 2 or 3 pages or 5 or?
It depends. It depends on where I am in the book. I tend to start out more slowly, and maybe I'm writing 5 pages a day or so. And as I get deeper into the book and kind of build up a head of steam, it can be more. It can be 10. I can hit 10 pages, 15 pages. As I'm getting closer to the end, it can be 20 pages. It just
so
builds its own momentum.
I always wonder, how do you know how long the book should be? I mean, how do you know when you've actually gotten to the end, right? Because, sometimes contracts specify it. Sometimes contracts say it must be this many words and not more than, but not less than, right? So you have a target. It didn't used to be that way, but I think that's now kind of standard procedure.
Well, that was such a standard. That's such totally the standard in romance. So when I first started, I was writing books that were what were they supposed to be, 65,000 words or something like right around 65,000 words.
200?
So about 200, 250. Between 200 and 250
pages. I mean,
pages.
a big thriller can run 120,000 words, and that runs over 400. Well, and you've seen some books like Outlander, or, we can hardly lift them. I can tell you that a carton of Outlander books, 10 to a carton, weighs 32 pounds. We have heard over time.
Sold by the pound.
Yeah. It's just like working in a gym to work at a bookstore, it's all that. But some of you may have heard me say that before, but Agatha Christie, for example, really wanted to write about 130-page books because her dream, or her, not dream, but what she wanted, because her plots were so, she didn't want anybody to read it and put it down. She wanted people to be able to read the whole book between dinner and bedtime. And the problem with that was that the signatures, the grouping of pages that make up a book are, I'm trying to remember, I think 32 pages to a signature, I think. Anyway, it wound up that the book she wanted to write left this big chunk of completely blank paper, which her publisher did not like. And so they made her write it longer in order to conform to, the length of the book. Or the number of pages in the book. But her books are short. When you read them, they really are short. And that was great if you were really fascinated with the plots. I think because her plots were so arresting that you could do that. And they weren't good books to pick up and put down in case you forgot.
You lose track of what was going on.
But when you're writing, today in these sort of big relationship-driven or thrillers or whatever, you're not going to read it between dinner and bedtime. I mean, there's just very little chance that you're going to do that. So the average thriller is about 360 pages, I guess, 380, something like that. And a shorter, like a police procedural, will run around, 300, I think. So anyway, even if you know that, my question is, how do you dovetail the story so that whatever page count it is you're going to, it's over? How do you know when it's done?
That's a really good question, and I don't have a really good answer for it. I write until the story's done, so I don't care if it's, if I got 500 manuscript pages, I got 700 manuscript. I have written books that were 700 manuscript pages.
When the story's done, what does that mean?
Oh, yeah. Well, yeah, when you've gotten to the point where, you've got to wrap up all the things you started. You're juggling all these balls, and you eventually have to stop them all. So, one at a time, they start coming to a halt, or they all fall on you at once, and then it's done. It's just sort of, I don't really have a good answer.
A really great book should have an ending that is as good as the beginning. It is very easy to have a real kick-ass start to a book, but it's disappointing for you as a reader if the promise, of the beginning, it all just fizzles out on you, and you think, why did I just spend, X hours of my life I will never get back?
Yeah, endings are hard.
I watched the new Death on the Nile. Rob and I were on a cruise, and one night we were so tired we didn't have enough energy because everybody else was French. There were 4 Americans on this trip, and everybody else was French. So we thought, well, we'll try Death on the Nile. It's always reliable. He didn't remember the plot. I did. And we'll watch the update. It wasn't Peter Ustinov, and whatever. It was the new one with Kenneth Branagh. God, it was awful. I mean, it was just awful the way they butchered it up. And after it was over, we both looked at each other and said, "That's 2 hours we're never going to get back." Just like there they went. And so I think it's important as an author that your reader doesn't put your book down and say, well, that was 6 hours of my reading life. I'll never get back.
Yeah, no, you want that real emotional punch at the end.
So you have to somehow or other pull everything forward to the point where you
and
can
it's not just
that.
Pulling the plot together, because then that's all the exciting part, and the person
but the
gets
relationships
caught.
have to work
But
too.
you have to then resolve all the relationship stuff, and that's hard. This book is very emotional. It was very emotional for me at the end, and I actually got to that point, and it was deadline, and they needed it by a certain date, and I was just so emotionally spent when I got to that. I'm like, I don't have it in me to do what I need to do at this end. I can't do it. I have to set it aside for a while. So I wrote an ending.
Yeah.
And sent it in, and I said, this is not the ending. Read the book, and I will write the real ending when I do the revisions. And but I was just like, I couldn't emotionally do it.
Yeah, well, you're right. It is deeply emotional. That's one of the worst things about doing these. That when a book comes out, is we can't talk to you about the really great stuff in the
No.
book. I had that conversation with an author I'm going to talk to Monday night, and the entire point of the book is the one thing we can't talk about, because it'll ruin it.
Yeah,
So we were
yeah.
debating what to do, but every once in a while, there's a book and a really good one where the author. I don't know if any of you read Ashley Winstead, and if you haven't, you should. She's a really good new writer, and I think it's her third book, and it too is set, I think, in a very similar, I'm trying to remember if it's Louisiana, but very similar in many ways to your story. And at the end, she you don't really know what happens to the two characters.
Ooh.
You are left to sort of vote, take your own vote. Did they get away or didn't they? And that's a different kind of an ending, I think. I wouldn't. It's like Gone with the Wind. I mean,
I
that
kinda like
Gone
that.
with the Wind. That's how it ends.
Yep.
You don't know what is going to happen. She's going to go back to Tara, and you have no idea whether.
Yeah, I kind of like that because, I've gone on this journey with these characters as a reader, and I kind of want that to continue on. I want to be able to imagine, like, oh, maybe this
Yeah,
happens,
but you
or maybe
can't
that
write
happens.
every
but-
book with
No.
a cliffhanger ending,
No,
or your
no.
readers are
Oh
going to
no, and
revolt.
people come for you anyway. They do, yeah.
Yeah, right. So, anybody else have a question? Yes, ma'am.
I would say probably about I generally liken it to having a baby. It's when you compress all the time, it's probably about 9 months of actual time. Yeah.
You mean a human baby and not an elephant,
Yes, a human baby.
right? Aren't elephant babies
It's
2
like
years?
2 years.
I think
yeah,
it's 2
yeah.
years. So if any of you watched the Instagram or got the e-news that I wrote to you, did you check the photographs of the elephants' migration from New York that I put in? No. All right. If you got yesterday's e-news, I had a link to in Manhattan, and it's moving on to Miami and then I think Los Angeles. From Thailand, there are 100 elephants, not real ones, but amazingly lifelike, and they are marching down 9th Avenue. And they have planted stuff around them and all, and they are all sizes. They're baby elephants. It's amazing. And people are coming from all over. It's called the Great Elephant Migration, and it's a way of kind of calling attention to how hard it is for animals, as the world is getting more and more urban. What is it they're going to do? Maybe they are going to have to walk around in New York. And so in part it's a fundraiser. You buy one. And in fact, we were in Newport the day before, and some guy in Newport apparently went down there when they were installing the elephants and bought two and took them back and put them out in front of one of the fancy hotels in Newport. And my husband, who was oblivious to all this, as we're walking around Newport, said, "Why are there elephants?" It's like, and I said to him, "Tomorrow, all will be revealed. You will get to go and see the elephants." So you can Google elephant migration, and I recommend you do because they're really terrific. Or you can look at our Instagram because I put my favorite elephant, who reminds me of my puppy. He has the same kind of look in his eye. I put him on Instagram because he's so adorable. But anyway, what was the point of that? Where was I going? I don't even remember. Yes.
Question. Since you started writing in this genre, have the audiences changed? And if so, has that dictated that you have had to change how you write? Or do you still keep writing the way you always have?
I keep writing the way I write. And writers vary, and writers write for different reasons, and some are more commercial animals that will adapt and change, and that's just not who I am. That's just not how my brain works. So I write what I write, and I put it out in the world, and it has to find its own life. Then it finds its own readership, and so yeah, that's how it works for me. I suppose readerships do change, do evolve as, new readers come in and younger readers
It's not
come
just readerships that change. That's really true. But fashions in what's published. Right now, you can't get away from romantasy.
Yeah.
I think the world, both in this country and elsewhere, is so divisive and so upsetting that people are gravitating towards cozy. It was part of my discussion with Ian Rankin today. He said, right now audiences don't want to read cop novels. I mean, it's not what they want. They want comfort reading, or they want escape reading. And so, social media is driving a huge amount of that. If you look at bestseller lists, they are very much influenced by TikTok and by influencers. Publishers are paying influencers to, direct taste and so forth. People like Reese Witherspoon, It's easier to let somebody else make your reading choices for you much of the time. That's why I'm here, right? And you have to sort of trust whoever it is that is recommending books to you. So Reese might be okay, but she wouldn't be a person that would be recommending books for me.
Yeah.
Because she's looking at making them into movies. And, not all books are going to translate into movies. So there's a huge amount of outside pressures and all that are changing what people are writing. Because after all, writers it's a profession. Ideally, they're getting paid. And to do that, they have to write what publishers think will sell. And so many of them make a transition. When I started the store in 1989, historical fiction, which had been huge. Any of you old enough to remember, Samuel Schellebarger and Thomas Costain and books like Forever Amber and all that? Come on. I mean, I know I'm old, but some of you must. Anyway, there was a huge thing. A big historical romance was an enormous thing in the 1980s. And then it died. And so historical mystery, what happened? They all moved into mystery, and so they wrote historical mystery. It was led by Umberto Eco in The Name of the Rose and Ellis Peters, who wrote A Morbid Taste for Bones. And those were big bestsellers. So all the historical fiction writers moved into crime writing. And I mean, there were like 8 Roman series. There were, Egyptian mystery series. Babylonian series failed. Nobody cared. But Egypt was great. And, medieval, the whole bit. And then everybody got tired of that because there was too much of it. And then it moved on. It was like the Da Vinci clones. I mean, there were like 5 years that everything that was published was a religious conspiracy thriller. I mean, that was it, because that's what sold. And everybody got tired of that. And we moved on to Twilight. And then we moved on to Gone Girl. And, and so, you can't make all those transitions. You have, as an author, some do, but most of the time authors just write what they write and hope their audience is there.
Yeah, and hope the audience stays with it. It's interesting to watch, and with the romantasy thing, and for years and years, fantasy was a little niche market, and so I feel kind of happy for fantasy writers. Now they're having their moment in the sun.
Well,
and horror too.
A lot of it is actually just porn.
Yeah, that's
really
what I'm told.
They call it, the code word is spicy, right? If it's, no, I'm serious. The minute, there are all these little code words that are now appearing. If it says sapphic, it's a nicer word than lesbian, apparently. If they say, I'm serious, I said to Patrick, how many people actually know or did know what sapphic meant? I mean, there we are. Right, and so spicy is a key word. And somebody asked one of the big fantasy writers who she thought her audience was, and she said bored housewives in Kansas. Mm-hmm. That was her audience, her target audience that she is right. Rebecca Yarros, that's who she's writing for. And so, I mean, it's a thing. It reminds me of, Victorian, all those little Victorian gift shops where guys would go in and there would be dirty pictures and, the whole bit. This is for women. This is female porn is basically what it is.
Yeah.
I know. Right. I'm too old. I don't care. But I mean, I did read a Rebecca Yarros, and as I have famously said, it's about it's dragons and sex, but it's not sex with dragons. So you have to keep that going. Right. And I also think that, people are a lot more comfortable with that kind of stuff now than once upon a time. You know?
Well, it's the whole Game of Thrones effect and House of the Dragon and all of that, which I love to watch. I'm too lazy to write fantasy, though. The whole, world building. And
it's
you
a
have
lot
to,
of work.
and it's a lot of work and keeping things straight in your head. And I'm like,
even George can't finish it. So
Yes, yeah.
Oh, there we are, waiting
Exactly.
for it. Right. Is there any final questions? Sorry, I keep wandering off here. It's probably the spicy cider. All right. Yes, ma'am.
Uh-huh. Just a list of titles. On my website you can and in fact it's printable because it says it's printable. I don't know how to do any of that, but it says printable list. So
There's a website called, I think it's called Stop You're Killing Me. Patrick, is that right? Young Patrick. Oh. More fantastic fiction? Okay, and it will generally take an author and list all their books. Publishers, as a rule, will list all of the author's books in the front, the front.
Yeah.
And it's not consistent because some of the time it's the oldest book down, and then sometimes it's in the reverse.
Newest book down.
And it's very confusing,
Yeah.
You have to
On the website, they are, if I recall, I never look. It's my, why would I look at my own website? But they are grouped by series.
Right.
So you can find all the Kovac and Liska books. Those are the Minnesota homicide detectives. You can find the series that's set in Florida. It was not a series. It's just 2 books that were the same characters set in Florida, and then there's another one set in Southern California. And they're grouped that way, so you can find them.
Do you ever read your own books again?
No. I mean, I'll pick them up and kind of randomly open and read a page or 2. But by the time I finished a book and finished all the work of revisions and all the different, you edit the book a bazillion times, I'm so tired of reading it. I'm not going to sit down and read it again. But I will pick a scene, all right, and that makes me happy. But I'm not going to sit down and read it cover to cover again because I've already done it like 82 times.
Got it. Wow. Well, this was a wonderful discussion. Thank you all very much for coming tonight.
Yeah.
And this would be the point where I usually give away a book, but because I was out with Tami, I forgot to get one. I'll go look for one while you say one more thing. I'll be right back. There we go. I know I have books in the back because I brought them in.
Well, dinner was worth it, I'm going to say. We went to a lovely French restaurant. It was great. So, are they? I have not had a chance to see them in concert. Well, I hear that I hear that they're really, really good. What was that restaurant? Is it?
We went to Francine.
Francine?
It's a
Yeah.
French bistro. And the reason I go there is it's very hard to find Sancerre, which is one of my favorite French wines, but they have it basically on tap at Francine.
Oh, wow. This is
So,
very, very nice.
All right. Patrick, did we do numbers? Okay. This is a book by Rachel Kohler Croft, who was here last week, but this is my advanced reading copy. And it's called We Love the Nightlife, and it's it's about vampires. It's perfect for October.
Who
Vampires.
else is hearing that song in their mind? I love the nightlife.
Right. They are in London in 1979. 2 women with a deep love of disco meet one fateful night on the dance
See,
floor.
I'm not the only one
No.
inspired by song.
That's right. So pick a number between 1 and 11, and we'll give this book away. Number 8. Is that you? Oh, excellent. All right. And if you are not inspired by vampires or whatever it is, you should. Here we go.
The disco part could be
Love it.
intriguing.
Right. So anyway, thank you very much for coming. Tammy, are you okay just to sign there?
Yeah,
Because you
yeah,
are,
I'm gonna
she's at
change
photographing
positions.
height. So feel free to, the numbers 1 through 11 should go first. And then if you want to take photos or talk to her or whatever you'd like to do, please do. There is candy in the back and there is some cider, spicy. if you
But
would
not
like
that
some.
kind of
No,
spicy.
sadly not. Anyway, thank you all very much for coming.
I'm going to trade.
Sure. I got it.
I'm
I know.
going to trade spots.